Well, you see, the word responsible, it's in the word, response. Able. You have to be able to respond. It's part of what moral responsibility is.
Well, but it's the nature of the procession. If you proceed from the source that is a father, then you must be a son and an only son because of the nature of a procession. Have you ever heard the word procession? Have you paid heed to the prefix pro in the word procession?
This is gonna be stuff like that. Like it just doesn't.
But this is to go even further beyond. This isn't even my final thought.
Or human nature or whatever. Yeah, I think that's what it's called, or something on human nature.
Yeah, discourse on human knowledge, I think it is, or something like that.
It's human nature.
Inquiry into human.
I've read a tiny bit of. No, I think I've read all of the first one of the things on religion.
Okay.
But and that was like I actually read it, but his biggest work, right, the human nature. I've tried reading through it multiple times, and it's just. I mean, he's a great, like, there's certain parts which I remember, like his way of dividing up things is very useful. Like he'll talk about number, like the way he relates number and identity is interesting in this one thing that I'm not going to be able to call. But, okay, I'm distracting from
the topic. It's cool. It's cool. I'm also a tangent follower. Cool. So let me jump this on, but how about this? So I will introduce myself. And then how about you introduce yourself, and then we'll sort of talk about how we came to get to this video, which really towards the end of it just consists of Jimmy mixed up which comment thread was which, and then accidentally deleted one of his comments and was like, okay, this is I'm frustrated to the point where I would rather just talk about this, because that's a whole hour's worth of typing wasted.
I know the feeling.
Yeah.
I've been doing a lot of. Yeah, it's terrible. Okay, so we can.
Cool. I'll start it.
We have absolutely no.
And there we go. Cool. Let me just check the outer chat. It has not started yet, but it should pick up. Let's see what happens. Okay, so just for anyone who's not caught up, I'm Jimmy Stevens, and I'm sort of a philosophy junkie. I like hanging out here on G+ and talking with a lot of the people that are on here that are interested in philosophy and theology and what people have colloquially referred to as the Great Debate Community. And I'm blessed once again to have Frank Dunleavy on here again.
The greatest.
It's good to see you, man.
Yo, it's good to see you. Same. All that. Yeah. I'm Frank Dunleavy.
No, wait, you have to finish that. You have to finish that. You were going to say the greatest.
No, I said, you said this is a great blessing. I'm like, the greatest, because I am
the greatest. Yeah, yes. Nice catch there. Yeah.
There's no greater blessing than Frank Dunleavy.
Well, hey, if you get the beard going like a couple inches longer, I don't think anybody will be able to disagree with you there. The beard, the glorious level of the beard, will have transcended all. Yeah.
I have a transcendent beard.
Cool. So, yeah. So we're having this conversation, and there will almost definitely be tangents here, but I can't even remember how long ago this was now. A couple weeks ago, you sort of came across a photo, a snarky meme that I had created, which was a polemic against agnosticism. And you also at the same time came across a video. I think it was the video that I mirrored from One Way Apologetics.
Was it a mirror? Okay.
It was, yeah.
I thought it was you who made that. I mean, I think I did know it wasn't like. I suspected that it was. I don't know. Never mind.
I fixed, basically I took his video and I fixed the sound quality. I like the video, but I thought the sound quality was really poor in the original. So what's funny is that's not even my that video. I like that video, but I also have I think it's still public. I also have a video where I went over my own demonstration of the tag.
I responded to that too. I said that's I gave a counter to that, which I said it was in fact. So you tried to say that it wasn't circular, and I said it's not circular. It's question begging. It's question begging. It's and you said it wasn't, and I sort of my counter was just like, yeah, it was. I like the stomp the foot down counter. It's I think I know what you're talking about. Like
I'll have to go back and look, because I know I lose track of the. I wish that Google would like keep the comments in one place, because for YouTube I have to go onto my YouTube account to make these comments come up when people look at the video, because I want people to be able to see the comments that are on the page, but I just don't want trolls to come on and put like a bunch of curse words and nothing but curse words on there. So I can't remember what the word is. Things aren't automatically allowed when you try to comment. So I have to go in there and like allow all of them. But it's annoying because most of the time I'm responding on Google+. I'm using the notification system, which is much better. It's faster and better, and I can link people's names, which I can't do on YouTube, which I just find infuriating.
Is this what you're talking about? Right? That see in the side chat. Because if you can see at the very bottom.
Yes, it is. It is. Yeah,
I gave like a quick little.
Oh, you know, okay. You know why? Because I muted this post after Jim Ripper Jones and whoever those two guys are, like, they started commenting a whole lot of unrelated gibberish, and I just muted the post. But now I see. Okay, so I never even saw this comment that you made. I'm gonna have to go back now.
So I'll read this right now if you want.
Please do. Yeah.
Premise one needs to be better defended. The defense you give begs the question. For the same reason I would reject the conclusion God exists, I would reject your defense of the truth of premise one. That being, it presupposes the entire Christian worldview, which itself holds in the claim that God exists, i.e. the way you've defended the argument. The conclusion only follows given axiom 5, but axiom 5 includes the conclusion. Because of this, your argument can provide no reason for me to accept either axiom 1 or premise 1. The argument, axiom 5 or premise 1. The argument isn't reason giving and cannot be expected to persuade me to take it on. Without a defense of premise 1, that doesn't ultimately presuppose those propositions in your view that are not shared by my worldview. I can have no reason to take on premise 1, and so have no reason to come with you to the conclusion. Just because the conclusion isn't one or more of the premises doesn't mean the argument isn't question betting. It just means it's not circular. They're not the same fallacy. And I link to something which is off. You know, it's a thing that shows the difference between circularity and question betting. Which I'll.
Interesting. Yeah, I think. Excuse me. I think. Yeah, I think if you take the axiom as a point of something that needs to be accepted like a premise, then yeah, then that would be problematic. But I think perhaps I was treating axioms differently, and in that case, I'm not sure that the.
You took axiom 5. Like, let me quickly. I'm going to mute myself really quick so I can restate the axiom. Yeah, axiom 5 is Christianity is true, right? You're allowed to assume that in your own view, but you cannot try to use that as a persuasive argument for me. So your axiom 5 was Christianity is true.
Sure. Okay.
And the argument is premise 1, if God is treated doxastically, God exists. Premise 2, God is created doxastically. Conclusion, God exists. Well, yeah, that's true within your view, but you're trying to persuade me to take on your view. Otherwise, it's not even an argument. It's just a sort of internal statement. So it's just sort of like following the definition of God. So yeah, it's true within your view that if God is treated doxastically, God exists. But why should I believe that? And you say, well, Christianity is true. It's like, okay, that's your claim.
Oh, no. So okay, I see. No, I think the defense of that, because what's
You
it
defend it.
called?
You do,
I anticipate, that's the word I was looking for. I anticipated that question, right? Why should I believe that doxastic states about God have any implicatory relationship to him? And my response to that was, well, the question begs it. Because the only way you can ask that question as if there's any room to doubt at all about the subject is if you already have a negative answer to the question.
Like, a question can't beg a question. That doesn't make sense. Like, are you saying that there's a presupposition in the question itself? Like,
yeah, that it makes sense to doubt premise one, or that it's possible to doubt premise one.
The thing is, I'm doing it by asking the question. The very question is itself affirmative of the fact that it's possible to doubt.
Well,
I couldn't ask the question.
Okay, well, let me restate it. That it's possible to rationally doubt the question. Right, because you can doubt that you...
The possibility to rationally doubt the question is your burden of proof, though. It's your view which states that it's impossible. I just asked the question. Maybe I don't believe it's impossible. That's an internal critique. Maybe or maybe not. It's not even an internal critique. It's okay. I can ask the question without presupposing that the question is that the doubt which incites the question is rational. The question itself makes sense. The question itself is you understand the question. Otherwise, you couldn't. Otherwise, like the fact that you understand the question, the fact that it's meaningful to you, suggests that you understand the question. Suggests that it's a question which it makes sense. So if the question makes sense, how is it question begging? If you're attempting to persuade somebody that the Christian worldview is true, you do so by assuming the Christian worldview, which is not necessarily it's not necessarily wrong. If the Christian worldview is true, then the Christian worldview is true. That's a tautology, right?
Sure.
But
well,
why should I believe the Christian worldview is true? The whole point of an argument is to persuade people. And if you're saying, well, you should believe the Christian worldview is true because according to the Christian worldview, X is that, it's like, well, that's circular. I mean, that's question begging. Like, if I ask you, why should I believe it? And your answer is because it's true. I was like, well,
I don't think that was my...
I'll try to read through it again. Like, I'll read through your thing. So.
Well, if I could just restate what I said before. I don't think my response was it's true because it's true, or the conclusion follows, or premise one is defended given the conclusion, or given the axiom. What I said was the question is question begging as long as we're taking the question to mean that someone is putting premise one into doubt. That's question begging if the person hasn't already founded grounds for that question. Because when I understand that, like you just said, yes, I understand the question, but I understand the question in light of Christianity already being true. And I only take that question as being understandable in light of Christianity being true. So if you're appealing to my interpretability of that statement, then you're appealing to Christian theism. But if you want to say that question is meaningful outside of the worldview that's being argued, then you would have already had to have brought that to the table.
I don't have to say the question is meaningful outside of Christianity. The question just has to be meaningful, and it has to have an answer. Why should someone outside of your view take on your view?
But then I don't understand. The question seems to lose its
According
significance.
To your view,
right?
Why should someone who doesn't share your view take on your view?
Well, the answer would be the same for any view, right? If somebody believes that it's raining outside, and you ask them, okay, suppose someone comes along who doesn't believe it's raining outside, and now you ask, why should they believe that it's raining outside? Well, because it's raining outside.
That's not it. And Matt Dillahunty actually talked about this in his debate with Saitan Rugenkate. The truth of a thing is not a sufficient reason to believe it. It's not even a reason at all for believe it. You have to know it's true. The truth itself is not a reason to believe anything. The reason to believe anything would be a reason, but like if you say it's true, that begs any question anyone would ask you. It's like, well, the reason you should believe it is because it's raining outside. Okay, well, we're not out. So suppose we're in like a blocked room, right? And there's two people inside the room, and one person says it's raining outside, and the other, and like, you know, you don't hear the rain, you don't see the rain, you don't have any of that, right? There's nothing outside this room. It's just like a blocked room, like Mary's room, sort of like she sees no color. Well, in this case,
Right.
And you're talking to another person, you say it's raining outside. Why should he believe you? Because
Well,
it is.
I think you're asking a different question, right? One question is about justification, which is inherently related to truth conditions of knowledge, right? Justification only makes sense in light of the proposition being believing having truth value, right? There's no such thing as justification for a belief outside of the proposition that's being believed being true. Otherwise, it's just not knowledge.
The Gettier problem. That is the Gettier problem, is that you can have justified false belief. That's the point of the Gettier problem.
Right. So I don't agree with that interpretation of the Gettier problem. But even if you take that interpretation of the Gettier problem, all one needs to say is, okay.
That's why externalism is necessary. Sorry.
Okay, that is one argument for externalism. My point is just that anytime you have justification, it already assumes a program of epistemology where we are trying to believe things that are true, right, and not false. So when you ask me, why should I believe this, right? If I say, well, it's true.
Okay, I see what you're saying, right?
Let's suppose that we both believe that it's true, right? And then I say, well, why should I believe this? Well, if you already believe that it's true and you don't think that that's a sufficient reason, then no justification that I give you will be sufficient.
You're presupposing that I already believe it's true. You're presupposing that I am either lying to you or self-deceived in when I ask the question. But that's your presupposition.
I'm just showing in the thought experiment. Suppose two people know it's raining.
In the thought experiment, perhaps we both believe it's true. Well, the reason I ought to believe it's true is because I already believe it's true, right? That's what you're saying.
No. Hold on. What I'm saying is the extramental state of affairs bears weight on your doxastic states. It has obligatory implications for your doxastic states, your beliefs, right? So your beliefs, you don't believe something because you believe something. You believe something because it's true. The outside world tells you what you should believe.
What do you mean by because here? Do you mean that the outside world causes me to believe what I believe? Are you saying that there's a reliable process by which the outside world results in me? That's a different thing.
I'm saying the ultimate goal of epistemology is to have knowledge, right? And knowledge is.
So it's not an efficient cause you're talking about. You're talking about a final cause. So sure, if I want to believe in true thing, so like we can put this into, instead of a categorical imperative, we can put it into a hypothetical imperative. If I want to believe in true things, I ought to believe in true things. This thing is true. Therefore, I have to believe it. Well, but when you put it in the form of a categorical imperative, I still can ask the question. It shows that it begs the question. So yes, if take the categorical, the hypothetical imperative. If something is true, I ought to believe it. Premise 2, P is true. Conclusion, I ought to believe P. Well, why should I? You beg the question. Why should I believe premise 2? Like that was the thing that was questioned in the first place.
No. Wait, that's why I was pointing out. That was why I was pointing out that the question is trivial, right? Because you were asking me, given that it is true, why you should believe the argument. And I'm saying, well, given that it is true, the argument follows by necessity.
But it's not given. You've assumed as an axiom Christianity is true. I haven't.
That's fine. But then what is your basis?
Your argument begs the question, any question that I might ask.
Only if you're... That isn't my argument against questions which are external. If you're asking the question from the perspective of my epistemology, then I can just answer you, well, because Christianity is true. But that's what you said you weren't asking. You said you weren't asking the question
from within your view, as I understand it. And we both share this general hypothetical imperative. If something is true, we ought to believe it is true. And yes, according to your view, Christianity is true. But why should somebody who doesn't share according to your view, why does somebody who doesn't share that premise 2 take on the premise 2? And if you're saying, well, because...
Wait, are you asking...
You're begging their question if they were to come to ask you it. You would say, well, you ought to believe it because it's true. It's like, but why should I believe it's true? And you would say...
Right. Okay, so maybe I misunderstood the question. Let me parse this out real quick here. When you ask why should they believe that it's true, given my perspective, right, from the perspective of my worldview, why should somebody else who doesn't believe it believe it? Are you asking? Are you asking about the truth condition of knowledge, or are you asking about justification? Like, why are they justified in believing this? Or are you asking me why should they believe this generally?
Okay, you're seeking to persuade them that it's true. What is a good reason for them to believe God exists? And if your argument
on what standard of good reason, though, right? From my epistemology, from their epistemology.
But from your view,
There's no
why should somebody who doesn't share your view take on your view?
Because of my view, that right, that if you granted me that my worldview is true,
yes, but they're not granting.
Then I can just.
You know that the person you're talking to isn't granting your view. Given that somebody isn't granting your view, according to your view, what should persuade them? What reason?
Oh, I can't persuade them. I have no ability to persuade them.
Then you have no argument. If you do not have the ability to persuade me, you have any argument you have, according to your own view, should not work.
That assumes that the purpose of the arguments are to persuade people, right?
Well, then what is the purpose of the argument then?
Well, the purpose of the argument is to convict people. I don't think that I can. I don't think that I can persuade people to believe. I think from my Calvinist soteriology, I think that it's totally up to the Spirit of God to move people to believe. But as far as
can your argument be an instrument of the Spirit of God?
Yeah, my argument could be an instrument.
If they can, then you can be an instrument of the Spirit, and through you, and thus through you, the Spirit can persuade, and thus you instrumentally can persuade. Now, if your arguments cannot persuade, then even the Spirit can't do so, because it's a limitation on the arguments themselves, not on the Spirit. Oh
no! See, I wouldn't agree to that. The Spirit can persuade despite whatever tool it uses. You can use a crooked stick to draw a straight line. In other words, just because even a terrible argument, like for example, there are people who write into William Lane Craig all the time who say, "Oh, my life was changed because of your apologetic pursuits." Now, I, as a Calvinist, read that, and the entire time I'm thinking, yeah, that you were saved despite this man's terrible argumentation.
But is there any good argumentation, according to your view?
Yes.
Okay, so what is the argument that ought to persuade me, according to your view, given that I'm not granting you your view?
Well, I think the tag that I presented is a good argument.
But your tag begs. I've demonstrated that even that your tag begs the question. It's if I'm not granting you your view, according to your view, why don't I take on your view? And if you say that according to your view, you cannot persuade me, there's no good reason. Like so let me reformulate it in terms of persuasion. According to your view, given I am not granting you your view, what ought to persuade me of your view? What argument ought to persuade me of your view? Is there any argument which ought to persuade me of your view?
Yeah, well, I think there's many arguments that could be given that would
should bad arguments persuade me of your view according to your view? Should bad arguments persuade me of your view according to your view? Is it a good thing to be persuaded by bad arguments according to your view?
Let me answer that yes and no. No, in the sense that you should not call a bad argument a good argument, meaning you should not infer a conclusion on the basis of the bad argument. However, yes, in a sense, bad arguments are evidence of Christian theism, because argumentation of any sort just is evidence of Christian theism, given the perspective
right. The question isn't whether or not the arguments themselves are evidence of Christian theism. The question is whether or not one should be. The question is there a good argument for Christian theism? Is there an argument that if someone is not granting Christian theism, and this is according to Christian theism, is there an argument according to Christian theism which, if someone is not granting Christian theism already, they should be persuaded by? In the intellectual sense, not in the moral sense. I mean, I'm sure you could say morally everyone ought to be persuaded, but like that's a different thing.
Well, but I think what you're asking, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here, Frank, but we keep coming to, we're attacking the same conflict here with different language games, different perspectives. But to follow up on the persuasion perspective of this problem, I think people are, because I believe people are already, in a sense, persuaded as to the truth of Christian theism. I don't have. It's not a purpose of my arguments to try to change people's minds about the matter. The arguments exist to convict people about what they already know.
Okay.
At least that's my perspective, right?
So you can't persuade anyone according to your own view. That there are no good persuasive arguments to people who do not grant you your view according to your own view.
If persuasion is the
because and according to your view, because no one actually believes it, right? So the thing is, I haven't granted. So now that's an internal to your view, right? You already believe that I believe. So there is no argument to persuade me because I'm already persuaded, right? I cannot be persuaded according to your view because I already am, right?
As long as we're talking about persuasion that Christian theism is true, yeah.
Okay. If I'm already persuaded, so that's the internal. According to your view, I am already persuaded. The problem is, that's question begging, because now we get to the external critique. I have no reason to grant you that I'm already persuaded.
But on what grounds, though?
There is no grounds for not being granted. This is like, I could be a complete skeptic and just not grant it to you. Even the universal skeptic could say this. I have no reason to grant you that I'm not persuaded.
I don't understand. Why are we allowed to?
Why ought I grant you your worldview? Why ought I grant you your worldview? Why ought I grant you?
And that's why.
Why ought I grant you that I am in fact persuaded? Why ought I?
But let's put the bracketed.
And this is no longer
behind that, right? From the perspective of your epistemology, why ought you to grant me my worldview, right? Well, from the perspective of your epistemology, I don't think your epistemology can stand, right? That's the problem. Is we're assuming that question can be even built up on what your epistemology intends to do. But if you don't have an epistemology that can ground that doubt, that just is the argument. The argument is, look, you can't have doxastic states without assuming the very conclusion that the Christian God exists. Well, hold on a second. I have an epistemology over here by which I can ground those states. Okay, let's look at that, right? And that was my anticipatory remark.
That doesn't sound like it's presuppositionalism anymore. That sounds like it's like the cumulative case approach. That sounds like you've gone from presuppositionalism to cumulative case. You've gone from, I mean, maybe I'm misunderstanding presuppositionalism then. Like,
to be honest, Frank, I think you're just misunderstanding what my defense of premise 1 was. My defense of premise 1 wasn't axiom 5. My defense of premise 1 was just, okay, my defense of premise 1 was just that someone cannot arbitrarily dismiss premise 1. So to dismiss premise 1, one must already have a negative answer, right? So someone must have a substitute for my epistemology to say that my epistemology is wrong.
And I don't see that as true, because there's normal rules of discourse. The fact that I and you speak the same language, the fact that, like, it sounds almost like you're saying that I cannot argue with you because I'm not justified in believing that arguments exist or anything like that, right? So I shouldn't even try to argue with you. But that's a problem, because then I'm not persuaded by your view. That doesn't make your view right. It just if we do not have a middle ground, right? You're effectively trying to eliminate, like that's one of the presuppositions thing. If there's no shared, like if we don't just agree to share a certain set of rules, like if we don't both agree to employ the laws of logic when we have this conversation, we have to agree to, if we don't both agree to have, like, either implicitly or explicitly agree that we're going to follow this or that system as then there's no inference to be made between us. We cannot persuade each other of anything because there's nothing we agree upon. It doesn't matter who is right at that point. We haven't agreed upon anything. Like we can't persuade. And now, of course, you say I already am persuaded, but that's nice. But that doesn't convince me. Well, our view. This is where incommensurability comes in. Our views are now perfectly incommensurable, because, and you could say, well, let's internally internally analyze my view or something like that. It's like, well, I could do the same to your view. I could use issues within internal things of your view. So one of the points I do an internal critique of sorts. I'll see if I can find it. I don't know. Actually, I'm not going to go that route anyway, because you were saying it. Say what you want to say.
Well, I think I agree with you that that we have to have that we have to participate in this rule system, right? If so, for your example is fantastic, right? If we're not both agreeing to certain rules of inference, how the heck are we ever going to be able to communicate with each other in a reasonable manner and get to the same?
That's the view from nowhere right there. It's that we both have chosen to agree with certain rules.
So can
I talk about persuasion all the time rather than internal, like internal justification as opposed to persuasion.
Well, let me jump on that real quick. The problem, I completely agree with that. I think this goes back to what Vanto would say when he said, you know, an atheist can count, but he can't account for counting, right? I think we're both in agreement about the laws of logic, but that seems rather trivial to me. It's about what the laws of logic are, what it means to follow them, what is their metaphysical grounding, and what place they have in our epistemologies, right? Yes, on a very trivial level, we agree to the laws of logic. Okay, question. What are the laws of logic? What does it mean to talk about the laws of logic? Are those...
We just list them.
No. You're thinking I'm asking a question about the content of rules of inference. I'm not asking a question about the content. Everyone is in agreement about the content. I'm asking a question about their metaphysical grounding.
Well, what I'm saying is that the content, the fact that we agree on something, that we agree on certain rules of persuasion and the like, gets in the way of the whole presuppositional method. That this whole thing about I'm saying about question begging is that, as a rule, in discourse, we don't expect people to prove that they are rational. As a rule in discourse, we don't expect people to prove that they're honest. Only after they, like, because if we do, and we can stamp our foot down on that. That's the type of thing we can just stamp our foot down. So even if they did provide some evidence of their honesty, did provide some evidence of their rationality, we could just say, well, you could just be doing this or that. Like one of the catchphrases I'll say is like, sufficiently advanced deception is indistinguishable from honesty. So no matter how much you try to show yourself honest, it's always possible that you're just being sufficiently deceptive, or sufficiently advanced idiocy is indistinguishable from, or sufficiently advanced, how's it go? Sufficiently advanced idiocy is indistinguishable from malice. So,
fascinating.
Well, like you see, there are certain sort of intuitive principles that we can explicate it, like the Grecian maxims, are ways of putting it, like the maxim of quality, quantity, or whatever. You know what I'm talking about, the Grecian maxims?
I'm not familiar with those, I don't think. Let me give it. But again, I think this is not the issue here, because yes, we agree on logic, but again, what logic has all the import on the apologetic discourse. So like, for example, suppose that we were in a lawn mowing competition, right? We both use the same lawnmowers, we both have the same tract of land, but then I ask you, yeah, so what do you think about our lawn mowing competition tomorrow? And you say, well, no, we're having a drinking competition. I say, what? Yeah, we're going to drink up the sea. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Yeah, you know that time like where we get onto the grass and we start drinking up the sea? Oh, I see. You think that when you're lawn mowing, that is drinking up the sea, even though it's really lawn mowing, right? We're using the same stuff, but because you have this view about it, that is, well, in this example, totally ridiculous. No sense can be made of the fact that we are using those principles. I completely agree with you. We're using those principles. In fact, you may be better at following rules of inference than I am. But the problem is accounting for them. The problem is, well, just what are those laws? And what does it mean to use them? And where do they fit into our epistemology?
What I'm saying is that your method, if you're trying to say that if you try to say that I can't ask that one question, that isn't because it presupposes I have some sort of background or something like that. No, that's not true. The question simply assumes the normal rules of discourse. The question, why ought I believe this view, just assumes the normal rule that if you want to persuade somebody of something, you want to give them a positive reason. That's just how it is, right? Like, that's what we do. If we want somebody to believe in things, we should give them a reason to. And if your reason is they don't have a reason to not believe in it, that's not a positive reason, right? That's no reason to take it on because
okay. So fascinating. Okay, so that's interesting because I would disagree with that. I would say, by definition, if I'm going to withhold belief in something, then I need a basis even just to withhold belief in it. If I'm going to have any intellectual activity whatsoever, I need a basis.
No, I don't. I disagree. I could do it without reason. I could just randomly withhold belief of a thing.
Okay, now the question is, are you saying you can do that in terms of, that could be a historical event, or are you saying that is a rational activity?
It's a historical event. The rationality of that activity is irrelevant because we
then I agree with you.
Rationality according to the rules of discourse.
I agree with you.
It just means following the rules of discourse. But in a sense, I mean, there's more to it than that, of course. You can add on to it, but we have to have some minimum agreement on what rationality is, independent of our worldviews, so that we can actually have a rational conversation at all. Because if we don't agree on what rationality means, our ideas of rationality are incommensurable, and whatever conversation we're having, if it's rational to me, it might be irrational to you, and if it's rational to you, it might be irrational to me. We have to agree on something. We just as we agree on speaking the same language, like we have some general agreement on the meanings of these words, independent of like a particularly broader system of understanding.
See, but sorry, go ahead.
This is why I say, like, this is my ultimate issue with presuppositionalism, essentially, is that the whole, like, a lot of presuppositional will talk about there is no middle ground. Well, there has to be, otherwise you can't convince me of anything. If there is no middle ground, you have a problem. Your view is perfectly incommensurable with mine, and if there is no degree of commensurability at all, if there is no overlap between our views, then you can give me no reason to take on your view. Now, this doesn't mean that I'm not self-deceiving myself. That doesn't mean your view is wrong. It just means that your method is wrong. This is why I talk about, like I think Maximus confesses his method is appropriate, the cumulative case approach. If I'm going to be convinced of Christianity, it's going to be that way. It's not going to be presuppositionalism. It's not going to be by, I can't make sense of anything. Well, I could just go into universal skepticism then. That doesn't mean anything. I could just, take on the silence of the goat, right? The silence of the cow. I don't need to make sense of things. Now, I want to be dang sure I want to, and that's what I'm always trying to do. That's why I try to go through the evolutionary reliabilism. That's why I try to do these things. But the thing is, I don't have to. I have been a universal skeptic in the past because I was genuinely convinced by the skeptical arguments. I have since worked really, really hard to show them wrong. But the thing is, I can be persuaded by skeptical arguments to just stop thinking. This is something I talked with MK, and I don't know if you saw that, what's been going on with him, but
he's using the block button in a very interesting way.
Yeah.
Well, let me, if I can jump on something there. So I think if I can parse out where I think we're actually disagreeing, it seems to be on two sides. I don't disagree with you that one can be arbitrary in what one doubts or what one believes. You can choose to believe things or doubt things just because you want to. And the funny thing is, it's not as if I can just choose. It's not spontaneous. It's not like I can just choose to believe in a flying cow and whoop, magically I have the belief. Like, I can't actually make myself do that. But I could, over time, through the use of some very simple mechanisms, delude myself into believing that, right? Or the opposite way, if I wanted to doubt that I had this conversation with you, right? I could delete my account. I could put some stuff on my computer so that I could never find our videos. I could take some drugs that really mess up my understanding of my memory. Right? I could do all these things to try to not believe it. But I think both of us would also agree, yeah, that's a bad idea. But here's the rub. The problem is not our agreement on rules of inference, or how to use our memory, or what counts as civil discourse, because I think we are in agreement over those. The question is just what those things are that we're in agreement, and what basis we have for agreeing on them, because our interpretations of those things are going to be different. For me, I don't think that those are worldview independent rules. I think that it's precisely because of their placement in God's providence and God's plan for the world that they make sense of things. It's precisely because I'm designed to think about the world in the way that God has planned the world to work, that I can talk about rules of inference. But for another person, they think they're
Yeah, I can talk about rules of inference arbitrarily. But I can
if
still
you want to.
Perfectly.
If yes,
we can still have a conversation. This is the problem with presupposition. I can still have this conversation with you as I am, and have no account for these things. I do have an account. I don't know if it works, and I'm willing to go through that. But the thing is, presuppositionalism tries to say that as far as I understand it, that I can't use these argument methods. That I'm not allowed to do it.
Let me just.
But I'm doing it, and so it must be wrong.
Wait. Let me just snip that. No one is saying you can't do those as an action, that can't take place as a historical event. What is being said is that those can't take place as rational activity. In other words, you cannot rationally do that.
Well, do you believe that rationality is a 0 or 1 type of thing? That you're either perfectly rational or you're perfectly irrational, or do you believe rationality emits of degrees, that you could be partially rational or partially irrational? If rationality emits of degrees, then perhaps I'm not being completely or as rational as you are, but I must be having some degree of rationality because I'm employing them.
Not at all. You could be more rational than me. The question is, okay, even when we
saying, is it rational to do this? Well, if I can be more rational than you and be an atheist, we have a problem for your method.
Well, wait a second.
I'm actually being rational and doing this and being an atheist at the same time.
But Frank, here's the issue. When we measure, when we measure in degrees, we have a measuring rod, right? So it's not just a question of is rationality biconditional. It's also a question of what is that biconditional measuring rod that we use to measure degrees? Because even though the degrees might not be biconditional, the measuring rod certainly is.
It's sui generis. It's its own thing. It's language. It's words.
Okay, that's your view, right? That's your view, and that's fine. But what I'm saying is, okay, I agree with you. I think rationality can come in degrees so long as the measuring rod is the wisdom that God has created, the standards that God has put over us.
But I could choose an arbitrary measuring rod, and it would still admit of degrees because it would be placed with regards to that measuring rod. Like anyone can choose any measuring rod. I could choose paperclip making as my measuring rod. Like whatever is the most efficient way of making paperclips, that's the measuring rod of everything. And we say that rationality is just efficiency in creating paperclips. And thus anyone who is inefficient at making paperclips is thus irrational, and anyone who is efficient at making paperclips is more rational. That's what?
You could, but wouldn't both of us find that view easily critiquable?
If you're how? They're defining rationality that way. That's their definition of rationality.
Well, where does their definition of rationality come from? Like, is it?
They just did it.
Okay. So stipulation is a sufficient ontological informant. In which case, I'll just stipulate that view is wrong.
Where does a definition come from? It comes from the person who defines the definition.
No. Sorry. What I'm asking is, on what basis are they saying? What is their justification for the belief that this is the standard of rationality?
They've defined it. Okay, so language is a social. Are you a language essentialist? Do you think that meanings are like there is a true meaning to a word, like independent?
No.
Well, then there you go. So long as like you might argue that they're not using rationality the way it's normally used, but they're still defining rationality. They're still creating a standard. paperclip making for the term rationality. Rationality is just a shorthand for paperclip making or whatever.
Right, but that seems
It
okay.
might
But that's not the same thing as arguing about what we're talking about when we use the word rationality, right?
Yeah, I admit it's not what we're talking about when we use rationality. The
Okay,
question,
okay. So
what
then
are
I
we-
don't understand what the
how do you define rationality? How do I define it? I define it as following the general rules of discourse. And these general rules are more or less unspoken, but we can try to work them out through
right there.
logic.
Right there. So I would, this is what I would say. I would say
Rationality.
my definition agrees with you insofar as my concept of rationality includes that a human being follows those rules of inference, but it doesn't reduce to that. That is not the bare minimum.
Yeah, but then there you go. I'm capable of being rational because I'm capable of following what rationality is, because I'm meeting the definition of rationality. This is actually an argument I use against DD. In the first time we talked, I mean, I think I knew him before then in Pal Talk. I didn't know that he was evolution false, but like as Darwin's deity. The first time we talked on Google Plus was, this is an argument I gave. Like he didn't like it, but like I was saying that what is it to be rational? It's just to meet the definition of rationality. To be rational is to meet the definition. And I was like, you know, the normal usage of a term determines the best definition, and there's going to be various overlaps. What I understand by rational and what you understand by rational is going to be perfectly identical, sure. But to whatever extent they overlap, that is the standard we must share. And we must say, according to what we both agree on what rationality is, am I being rational?
No, see, that's the part where I think we're disagreeing, right? If I could just jump back real quick, the two things that I think we disagree over. Number one is, I think you believe, this is how we came into the language problem. Was I was pointing out that one cannot be rationality and arbitrariness with respect to one's belief are incompatible. You cannot be arbitrary about what you believe if you want to be rational. And if you want to be rational, you cannot be arbitrary about what you want to believe, right? And so on that point, when we ask the question, why should I believe premise one of Jimmy's tag argument, right? That question either comes, that question either is being asked from the perspective of a Christian epistemology, in which case it already has its answer. The answer is the very thing that allows you to ask the question. Or it comes from the perspective of a non-Christian epistemology, in which case one would have to bring forth that epistemology and establish it so that you can ask the question, right? Because neither one of us is going to grant each other's epistemology, right? Both of us want to come together, and rather than just, in other words, the argument doesn't stop there. Now, okay, now we move on. Great, we agree that we're in antithesis. Okay, now let's move to exploring each other's epistemology. What do you believe? What do you live your life based on?
This is where I cut in. Actually, you can keep going. But like, can you repeat what you just said? That neither one of us wants to grant each other's epistemology.
Yeah, right. So for example, presumably, for example, an evolutionary reliabilist would, most of them at least, would say, I am a biological creature, right, driven by desires that are perhaps not reducibly, but at least to some degree grounded in my genetics. And so when we talk about math and economic decisions and worldviews and stuff like that, right, I am operating in this evolutionary world of survival, right? In other words, he doesn't believe that I'm actually operating under the revelation of God. That's not part of his epistemology. He believes that his epistemology grounds the bridge between our two worldviews. It's just because I'm an evolutionary creature that he can talk to me and have these rational discussions. Likewise, from my point of view, I don't think that he actually runs on evolutionary reliabilism. I don't think that his evolutionary reliabilism does anything for him except to act as a dead branch on the tree of his beliefs. I think it's precisely because he is a creature made in God's image who's working with the concepts that God has given him, the world that God has given him dominion over, that he goes about his life and talks about worldviews and so on and so forth, right? We both have different philosophies, even of the bridge that gaps us. But I don't think that that's problematic. That's not an issue. That doesn't cause incommensurability. It just means the only kind of argument that's valid at that point is internal critique. The only way that I can get you to drop, what I call the dead branch of evolutionary reliabilism is to make arguments against that perspective.
But you can't give me a reason to take on your. The problem is, okay, so you see, we both agree that we disagree. Okay, if we have any, then you say the only way is to do internal critiques. Okay, how? If I don't agree with, like,
Because we've already accepted from the get-go that one of us is right, or both of us can't be wrong, because if you admit that your foundations for even talking about right and wrong are wrong, then you wouldn't be able to argue in the first place. One of us is right.
I could say that there are. I could say vaguely there must be some foundations. Maybe I don't know what they are. Maybe the ones that I think they are wrong, but there must be some foundations. I could say that vaguely, and we both agree on that. There must be some foundations. And we both agree that there are foundations. We just disagree on what that foundation is. The basis of my whole entire system could just be, I have a foundation there is a foundation for my view. I don't know what it is. Like, again, the mysticism you talked about, that you accused me of having.
Yeah. Right, I brought up the problem of mysticism before.
I've never thought of myself as a mystic. It's like,
it's a very idealistic.
It's necessarily true. If God does that, if your view is true, then that follows from universal generalization. It's just, okay, this is the thing. Well, more broadly, there is something that.
Right. I
completely agree that there is some basis. We just disagree on what it is. But even if I don't have a basis, I can believe that there is some basis, but not have any idea as to what it is. It's just a necessary belief to do anything. But I can have that belief without getting into the specifics. I don't have to.
Well,
now, you might then say abductively that your view is superior to mine because you do have a specifics, but that's no longer presuppositionalism. That's cumulative case.
Wait a second. What if it just is part of one's? What if it just is part of one's ultimate intellectual commitments? One's most basic, what we're calling the foundations here. What if it just is part of the foundations or a property of the foundations that they are accessible to the mind, access to the mind, and in fact known by everyone?
What do you mean, like?
Well, I'm saying it's problematic to say that you don't know what they are, because then you would have to know at least that they are the type of things that are not known. You would have to at least be an awareness of that. I don't seem
to know what they are. And they say, well, at least they are the type. Okay, so this is where my argument from agnosticism seems to come in, right? Knowledge does not imply knowledge of knowledge, right? So I could know that I don't know what the basis of foundations are, without knowing that I don't know it. And so long as, yes, I have to know it, and I could give you reasons why I know it. I could say, well, upon an immediate introspection, I see no reason inside my own mind. Well, that seems to be sufficient justification for believing that I know it. But my belief that I know that I don't know is not the same thing as knowledge that I know that I don't know, because I could be self-deceived. This is where my argument comes in, right? Maybe I'm self-deceived. Maybe in my introspection, I'm just failing to look through the folds large enough because something's hidden beneath the surface. Maybe. But that's your job to prove.
Right. I don't think that that's a good. I don't see. None of the presuppositional, none of the Reformed apologists that I follow would make that argument, and I wouldn't make it either, because I don't. Yeah, I understand. But I'm just saying I don't think that argument is helpful, precisely for the second point that you make, which just is, well, that sort of just reduces to a cop-out. You would have to first demonstrate that the person
works. That's the problem. It shows presuppositionalism false. It doesn't show Christianity false. It shows presuppositionalism false. The method you are employing doesn't work because I can cop out. If I have the ability to cop out, you have a problem. You have to stop using presuppositionalism and use a different apologetic methodology.
Well, what I'm saying is I think the cop-out is... Well, what I'm saying is I think the cop... That's right.
I'm gonna calm down. I'm like, Musa.
No, but I totally understand that. Like these conversations are super exciting. I'm really blessed to have them with you. Yeah. Well, no. What I'm saying is I don't think the cop out is an inherent piece of presuppositionalism. What I'm saying is that argument. Someone trying to use that argument on behalf of evangelism or apologetics is copping out. In other words, they're actually being inconsistent with their own methodology of arguing, because accusing someone of self-deception isn't a basis for disbelieving their position.
Oh no, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that I have a theory of self-deception, right? I'm pouring my own view. So if a presuppositionalist comes to me and asks and tries to show that I cannot argue with them, I have to go silent, right? And I have to think more about this stuff because of I don't have an account for these things. My point is, I might not have an account, but I must have some foundation because I'm basically doing a Moorian shift, right? You're saying I'm doing a Moorian shift on presuppositionalism. They say you can't do you can't argue because you don't have an account. But if you have an account, if you do not have an account, you cannot argue. You do not have an account, therefore you cannot argue. No, sorry. If you cannot account, if you do not have any foundations for your belief, you cannot argue rationally. You do not have a foundations for your belief. Therefore, you argue rationally. Well, I'll just say, okay, I do have a foundations for belief. I just don't know what they are.
But then you can't. Then that wouldn't provide you with the basis for saying that they're not Christian, right? Because they could be Christian.
I wouldn't, but the point is, my goal here isn't to refute Christianity. My goal here is to refute presuppositionalism, and the presuppositional methodology effectively is a form of. It's like a skeptical argument, right? In the same way you would refute presuppositionalism, you would sort of refute skepticism, and it's a Moorian shift. You would just sort of stamp your foot on it. It's like, no, I do have a foundation. I just don't know what it is. Now, I believe I know what it is. I believe that it's evolutionary reliabilism. But the point is, even if you show evolutionary reliabilism not to work, I can still cop out to that broader position. And because I can, presuppositionalism doesn't work, and you have to use a different methodology, such as the cumulative case approach. You can still say, well, that okay, maybe you don't know. But I have a solution, and this is the only solution there is. So why not take on? Like, I mean, this is. I mean,
so I have to take off pretty soon. But let me ask you something about that, Frank. So I understood when you reasoned the other way around. I completely agree that if you have Hinduism or Platonism or Christian theism, one can say, okay, from this there is some basic foundation. Right. In other words, if you have the specific, you can say there's the general. Right. That makes sense. What I don't understand is, okay, if I take away the specific, right? If I demonstrate the falsity of your most basic intellectual commitments, being evolutionary reliabilism, what basis then do you have to infer that there or to argue that there is a general foundation other than presupposition?
I already gave that, right? That was my argument. An apparent. In immediate introspection, I seem to understand what rationality means, right? I use the term. I know how to use. Like this is the. A while ago, I commented this to you. It's sort of like a Wittgenstein. I know how to use the term rationality. I might not understand it completely, but I must have some understanding of it because I'm using it. In immediate introspection, I don't seem to be self-deceived. So,
but that seems to
demonstrate irrational because and it doesn't seem that I'm. Well, I believe in your view, then there must be some foundations according to like the Moorian shift. There has to be some foundations.
But that seems to demonstrate that you're what revelational epistemologists have called presuppositions. But I think it's better to call them, your most basic intellectual commitments. They weren't evolutionary reliabilism all along. They were rationalism, right? Your ability to introspect is your most fundamental belief-forming mechanism, your most fundamental principle of rationality, your most basic starting point. It never was evolution, but that just means
it's no.
I was arguing
my
against
belief-forming mechanism. So there's two ways of looking at these things, right? So there's the
Let me put it this way. Let me put it this way, really quick. If what your argument, concerning the ability to forego evolutionary reliabilism in favor of a more general, unnamed foundation of knowledge. What I'm saying is, okay, that assumes that evolutionary reliabilism is dispensable. So it's no longer the indispensable precondition of all your rationality. Something else is.
The indispensable evolutionary reliabilism isn't the thing that's indispensable. The thing that's indispensable is my reasoning. I can't not reason. It's not a matter. And the same thing with my senses. I can't not sense. The same thing with my actions. I can't not act. These are indispensable. Like, these are indispensable in the sense that I literally can't not do them. By trying to stop reasoning, I have to reason to get to that. By trying to stop perceiving, I still perceive something. I'm still aware of something. Even if I close my eyes, shut my ears, I'm aware of the absence of things. The absence itself is something I'm aware of. By virtue of not doing anything, I do something. That is not do anything, right? If somebody paid me to press a button, or like, imagine I'm in a situation where I'm paid either $100,000 to press a button or $10,000 not to press a button. If I don't press the button, I've still made a choice, right? Action is indispensable. I can't not act. It's not logic. It's not possible.
But I think, Frank, and I'm not trying to, this is not a gotcha card here, but I think you're playing into Van Til's hand when you say that, because that's sort of his big soapbox, right? Is that behind all of the sophisticated philosophies of the unbeliever, really it just comes down to, he believes that his ability to reason, that his rational activity is the ultimate starting point of his life and his worldview. But if that's the case,
starting point. I'm just saying that I can't not do it. I'm unable to do otherwise. I try not to reason, but like, I have to reason to do that. Like, I could sort of like go into like a meditative state, I guess, but like, I'm still aware. There's still some cognitive processes going on. I try to go into a sensory deprivation tank, but there's still something I'm sensing. I try to not act, but not acting is itself an act.
What about sleeping? No, see, I'm not trying to play a get you card there. I mean,
I'm still acting, but like whether or not.
Right. Yes, and I would agree to that. But I think the larger point here is just, okay, what does, in other words, it seems trivial, right? What does the indispensability of one's rational activity do for answering the question about foundations of beliefs, right? The question I was asking was, wait a second, I understand how you can say if evolutionary reliabilism is true, then there are more generally unnamed bases for beliefs for everybody else who's not aware of evolutionary reliabilism. But what I don't understand is, if you take away the evolutionary reliabilism, what basis then would you have for foundations of reason? And what I understood your answer to be was, there's this indispensable introspection. There's this awareness. There's this practice of reason that one cannot get out of. But that just seems to mean that our ultimate commitment, then, our most basic system of philosophy, is no longer evolutionary reliabilism. It wasn't ever evolutionary reliabilism to begin with. It was rationalism, right?
The commitment I'm making for the basis of my epistemology is that I have a basis for my epistemology. If I don't, then skepticism is true, right? The universal skepticism. If you have no basis, then you don't believe in anything. Any epistemology must have a basis.
I agree. But how can you have a basis without having the basis, is my question.
What do you mean?
I mean, somebody who thinks that they have access to what is or thinks that they have definite awareness of what is actually the foundations for epistemology can claim to say that there is a general foundation of epistemology, right? He has the specific example of that. But for someone who doesn't have access to what is the definite foundation of knowledge, on what basis is he going to say that there is one? It seems to me he has two choices then. He can either just say, I believe it because I want to believe it, or he can do what I think you're doing, which, and I could be misunderstanding you here, but the best understanding that I have of what you're saying is, well, my reasoning, my act of doing epistemology, even in the smallest, most simple degree, is inescapable. It's ineluctable. It's not something I can do without. So there must then be a basis for epistemology because I'm doing it. Well, wait a second. If that's the case, then really what you're saying is the metaphysical basis and the epistemological basis for your foundations of epistemology is just you. It's just your reasoning faculties. It's just your cognition.
But how would I be the metaphysical basis?
Because to say that your reasoning is to talk about you, right? That's something that you do. That's part of your being, your acting, your existence. When I was, I remember trying to explain presuppositionalism to some of my buddies, and hopefully my language has got more clear. I used to use this phrase, and it's not very clear without context, but here I think it makes sense to bring it up again. Presuppositionalism is to epistemology what Calvinism is to soteriology, right? Because for the non-presuppositionalist, they believe that there's a synergy between God's revelation and man's reason, that man has to do some of the work on his part in order to get to knowledge of Christian theism. Right? In the same way that, say, an Arminian says, oh, well, I have to make the choice in order for me to be saved. God does all his work, but I do the other percent of the work. And the revelational epistemologist is saying the opposite. The revelational epistemologist is saying, wait, no, you don't even start with your being. You don't even start with your reasoning. You start with being created in the image of God. You start with God's creative act. God does all the work. It requires no activity on your part. It is ineluctable. The indispensability is still there, but it's not an indispensable act of reasoning. It's not an indispensable introspection. It's an indispensable creation. It's the fact that by being human, you are indispensably what God makes you, namely a being who knows God.
Something to think about, I suppose. Well, you have succeeded in putting me into silence. Well, except for that and that and that and that. But
Well, yeah. I mean, my goal here is not to.
no, I know you're not trying to like do anything. I'm just thinking Bonson. He's always talking about, and sigh.
Let's not even let's not even get on to sigh. No, but I do want to throw rocks in your shoes, right? Like I think. I mean, I honestly care about people, and so I see you, Frank, as a human being, and it's like, okay, this is a life and death issue, right? If Christianity is true, then there are a lot of people who are going to be blood on my hands if I'm not out there telling them, look, Christ is the only way, Christ is the Lord, and in intellectual circles, hey, Christ is not only the Lord of the trees and resurrection from the dead, but he's also the Lord of the mind. He's also the creator of our human minds, and he rules the world in such a way as to tell us how to live and what we're supposed to do and be believing. And so this is not just a soapbox for me to try to shut people up. I care about people. I want to see people saved. I readily admit that I am not the most persuasive. I should put it a different way. I readily admit that I'm not the most reasonable person. There are a lot of other apologists on here that are much clearer thinkers than I am. But I do care about people. So I don't care about shutting you up, but I will definitely throw rocks in your shoes if I think.
I'm good with that. Like, I like to be challenged, but I guess I'm going the way of the Greeks, right? We'll come back to it with you on this rather than I try not to be the mocker, but you know what I mean. You know what I'm referencing of Acts?
Yes, Acts 17. Yeah. And I think that is a fair response. If you walk away taking this as a good argument because it's it's the argument that God has set in time and history, and not because Jimmy Stevens